We're talking about tails today, things that can go wonderfully right and disastrously wrong.
Is what we're seeing
Yeah.
an actual bear market where we're going to see long-term
Mm,
shifts in earnings profiles and company valuations and the
yep.
decline in the US prominence in the global economy? Or is what we're seeing a reset of what had become an over dominant asset allocation to the US? And I'm not going to bet against the house. And the S&P 500 is the house.
The bull argument sounds so airtight at the top, and like bear market sounds so airtight at the bottom.
I mean, it's going to be something
Yes.
completely off the radar, like you're saying, that just acts as that spark.
We're all feeling stupid today, full warning. We were just confessing this to each other, but our mission here is very simple. All three of us talk to people in the world all day, every day. We are just exhausted about markets and business and all this crap. So what better way to make it harder on ourselves than to give you all a peek behind the curtain of what it's like when we rant and rave to each other about this stuff, making opinions and mistakes for you to mock and for each other's amusement on social media. I can think of no greater calling. We've got one pre-agreed upon topic we're going to hit, and then we all have surprise topics for each other with the rule that nobody Googles nothing along the way. So I'm Matt Zeigler, joined today by the guy with more 13F filings from ETF companies in his chats than F18 comments in his signals, Dave Nadig.
What to do with that? I don't know what to do with that at all. Although 13Fs, man, 13Fs are legit.
And the guy who's imprinting more headlines than a luxurious wide whale corduroy pillow, whose idea of personal defensive spending is securing an ailmail work jacket in Navy, designed by Graydon Carter himself. Call her Daddy Warbucks, Jason Buck.
Oh, that's good.
Oh man, and the maestro Matt Zeigler. But like now it's unfair. Like you're pulling those stuff from our private chats, and now I gotta be careful about what I'm texting you. This is not
It's
cool,
getting
man.
ugly.
Not cool.
Getting ugly. And also, I got to point out that like neither Jason or I have the game to repeat this back to you with like one of these
And
snappy things.
This is the only thing I can contribute to this conversation.
All
I
right.
feel
yeah, I don't think you want us to do it. I think you're just trying to dominate this intro niche, and you don't want anybody else coming after your crown.
regulatory capture, my friend. Regulatory capture. I learned from the best.
Oh God.
We're talking about tails today, which basically means in my lack of prep, I spent the last 2 days listening to nothing but Too Short with Freaky Tales on repeat. It got wild.
These are the tales, the freaky tales.
Yes. Yes, my friend. We're not doing that. I am going to blow the whistle on this one for you, though. We're going to talk about the things that can go wonderfully right and disastrously wrong, because I feel like people I'm talking to in these last couple of weeks, there's a lot of this. There's like, here's the things I'm super, super optimistic and excited about, and here's the things that are going to destroy the world. And I'm trying to put together a list for myself of stuff that is actually potentially like world ending, and also stuff that's, there's still some hope or excitement about, like, maybe this really could happen. Dave, you got any like
Do you want to go?
top of-
We're gonna go positive first because I'm usually negative Nancy on this. Let's go. Let's go long tail. Let's go the right tide tails.
give me like one of your best like right tail things.
So like I'm talking fairly short term because I think it's very easy to get caught up in like 20 years, blah blah blah. Like, let's just focus on two is where I'm thinking like what the world we can see in front of us. I think there are a couple of right tail things that can be incredibly powerful. One, I think that upside surprise of AI is always in front of us, and as much as I'm kind of I try to put the brakes on that stuff most of the time because there's way too much hype. I think it is true that sometime the next 24 months, we could have one or multiple genuinely exciting AI breakthroughs that have real impact, whether it's in medicine, whether it's in how we understand weather, whether it's in managing the economy. I mean, I can come up with a billion different ways it might happen, but I do think that despite the hype, there's a significant right tail side to AI.
Do you see it like with I'm curious on this for like businesses. Do you see actually businesses implementing it, like getting more efficiency, profit?
I mean,
like all
I've
that
talked to
stuff?
some folks that are doing that in the real world, like in the finance and advisory world. Like there's been uptick. Simple things like having AI meeting takers, I think, have made a big difference for some folks in their workflow. But that all seems pretty obvious, and we can sort of project like, oh, it's going to be adoption. We're going to improve call centers and people will be able to access their information better. That's all. I think that's all baked in. I think we all understand that part of the AI story. I think there are some real right tail upside surprises to AI. I also think there's some real left side negative surprises to AI, which we can get as crazy and doomer as you want from nuclear Armageddon on down. But the right side tails are, I think, real and could be really in front of us. And like, imagine like if we end up with something as simple as a break from, okay, we've got a good engine now like Claude 3.7. Imagine if you could actually run that on your phone without the internet. That would be transformative, right? That would change the world. It could happen. Like the kinds of advances that have been happening in AI, I think that utility to power curve could really shift, and that would be a big right tail win.
I'm there with you on that. And
Matt, you got
go ahead. What were you gonna say? We'll
no, I'm saying you jump in first.
Okay.
Sorry, can you can
Yeah. I'm with you on the AI stuff. I'm struggling where it's like where it jumps that line from little efficiency gains to like a real difference in businesses, where it like actually translates to something like at way bigger scale. Because in one sense, like in my world, it's like, okay, great, the note taker apps come back in, and now I don't know, we get more financial advice podcasts or something.
Let's grab a big one from the headlines. Doge, like we've got a minute and a half. We haven't talked about politics yet. Doge claims that they're going to rewrite the entire 10 million lines of COBOL that runs Social Security in 6 months. Right? They say they're going to do that with AI. I'm a bit of a seller on that narrative, having done a little bit of AI coding. I think that's an aggressive target, but I could be completely wrong. And they could, in fact, rewrite the entirety of the US Social Security system in 6 months. That would be an enormous set of cost savings. Like all those AI use cases all the dreams could in fact land, and those would in fact be massive productivity boosts. Now, do we have an economy that can absorb that kind of change that quickly? No, but let's put that to the side. Just the AI part, I think those right tails exist.
Okay, I'm buying on that one.
Jason?
One thing I'm laughing about when we even set this up in our group chat is like, I'm just waiting for this all to be clipped. And it's like the antithesis to the way we all kind of think about life. And I'm like, why are we setting ourselves up for failure with this one? But it's good to try to like steel man the other side. And then like, I think like because I thought we were definitely going to like politics and tariffs and those kind of stuff. But like, I'm glad we're at least talking about AI first. But like Dave's saying, like, we've all been around for all these huge technology shifts and changes. And the hardest part right now is like, it's even hard to see the right tail in the sense that like, we just see the things that are wrong with it, whether it's with our note taking or doing the emails and everything. But as we all know, like that stuff gets cleaned up, and then we experience things that we never knew existed, going into the future. So like, that's what I think about. Like, and you're seeing a lot of pushback these days though, that like the future is just all this slop from AI, right? Like all the AI bots are writing emails and text to each other, and like, we don't know what to do. But at the same time, one of the things I was talking about the last few days was like, it brings back a lot of the Main Street stuff of like, look somebody in the eye, shake their hand, kind of thing. And maybe us olds are kind of set up for that world more than anything else, is where, once again, IRL becomes the most important thing we can do with, live in-person meetings, with talking to people on the phone or in person, because who knows, now they could do avatars basically online or Zoom, but it's maybe going to be more in-person stuff. And then, the bots are going to be interacting. And then I'm always of the ilk, unfortunately, that, we're all essentially entertaining ourselves, or entertaining each other. And I always think about even what we do as a living, even though it's very serious, it's like we're competing with Netflix. And I also like that Netflix is competing with sleep, but we're competing with Netflix for the entertainment, bucket of people's lives. And so, part of that is, maybe AI makes everything more efficient. So it is really about, can you idiosyncratically entertain your tribe? So I think it just comes back to all these ideas of finding your tribe. And maybe, in real life becomes much more valuable than we could ever even imagine it could be.
I think the finding your tribe aspect of it, and or not finding, but entertain your tribe is huge. And I was just talking to so basically like an English professor who teaches writing and teaches creative writing and this stuff. And it dawned on me as he's talking about experimenting with AI and tinkering with stuff. It's like, there's this group of English professors who are kind of making fun of the prose that like the AI writes and what they see the students and the other people playing around with. And it's like, oh, this is clearly trained on, I don't know, like Nabokov or something like that. And like, here's the source material and here's what it's coming from. It's just reduplicating the same stuff. Here's the slop that's coming out of it. But now, I kind of get the feeling like this group of English professors probably hasn't talked like this to each other in a long time either,
Which is great.
which is kind of awesome in a weird way.
And going back even years before we had all this agentic stuff and everything, when it was just starting out with just LLMs, like I was always arguing, like it's getting rid of tasks, not jobs. So we don't need to necessarily be fearful of getting rid of jobs. It's just like when, 97% of us were farmers in 1900, like the workforce changes and labor changes and entertainment changes. So that's the other thing is we can't necessarily project or think about what jobs look like in the future. So I'm not necessarily concerned about that. I just think it was tasks. But then I think the other cool thing that came on the last few days is both pro and con. So I'm dying to hear Dave's take on this, is even like Ghibli and being able to, change your avatars in Ghibli, the pro of how cool that is. And then the con of like all that hard work Ghibli's done for all those decades.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a giant conversation to have about AI art, which, is its own conversation, which honestly, probably not the best use of our time to wade into that. I do think that some of the left tail, the negative tail on AI comes from that stuff, right? So Gen AI, whether it's art, whether it's spreadsheets, whether it's coding, whether it's text in the Wall Street Journal, right? All of that Gen AI comes with a lot of potential left tail problems. Trust is the biggest one. When it's people making video, funny Ghibli images from their family vacations, there's zero stakes involved, right? It is neither actually costing Studio Ghibli money, nor is it actually adding any value to the world at all. But those kinds of tools are also getting used in drug discovery. They're also getting used in setting train schedules and all throughout the ecosystem at varying levels of trust. And I've certainly seen plenty of examples just in my friends and family of people leaning on AI and then finding out like, oh, that was actually garbage, or that actually is not true. Or just an example I'll give, I won't name names, but there was a Twitter thread that a friend of mine posted a couple days ago, and it was just off. And I couldn't figure out why. And it was like 6 or 7 posts. And I literally pinged him and I was like, are you, I literally said, are you okay? And he's like, I wrote that with AI. And it's like, that's what it is, right? And it's like he even tried to make it as much like he'd started from scratch and edited through it, and it still came across as being artificial. And that erosion of trust, I think, is a lot of that negative left tail. I think the positive side, Jason, you're right. Like, I think that the in real life stuff is mattering more. I see that already happening. The left tail stuff is probably more around that kind of disruption. The art stuff, like, I can be upset about it, but my being upset for Miyazaki matters not at all.
On the positive side, though, of the optimistic side of the trust side, where I think is always interesting is we have this optimistic serendipity of at the same time we're getting this full advent of AI and then we're saying what's true and what's not, is at the same time we had the rise of cryptocurrencies and more importantly, tokenization. And so I think that was the thing that people didn't realize. I'm so happy that we have that. So then we can figure out what is real and what's not using the blockchain technology. So that was the interesting symbiosis I think we're having at the same time. Is like when you have the rise of AI and then blockchain attached to it, and then you could figure out through tokenization if this is real or not. But without that, it would be incredibly difficult. But with that, if we can kind of meld those two, there can be a really unique symbiosis there for knowing what's legit and what's not legit.
Yeah.
Matt?
That changes the equation for like the way we think about trust, right? This actually helps redefine trust going forward, which is another weird thing that we have just, I guess, in between our fingers right now.
Yeah, I mean, look, to be doomer about it, we are living in the midst of giant institutional decay, right? Some of it intentional, like that is the job of Doge, is to decay our institutions. It's a stated goal is make them smaller and do less. And at the same time, we've got banks getting into private credit, and private credit is now the biggest borrower from traditional banking in the US. Like those kinds of shifts happen in the background and we don't pay that much attention to them. They shift the trust landscape very dramatically. And I think that those things we probably don't talk enough about, but I tend to be more positive about that impact than negative, because I see this rise of what Jason's talking about, this in-person trust, this like, I'm not going to have a relationship with a company. I'm going to have a relationship with Janet. And if Janet moves from company A to company B, I'm probably going to go with Janet from company A to company B if they're selling the same thing.
Damn it, Janet.
Damn it, Janet.
Sorry, somebody had to do it.
Do you think that also, Dave, that like you're saying their decay or destruction of institutions, so not necessarily maybe institution, but like you said, going forward to the person, more bottom up, and maybe it's more the destruction of the managerial class. And is part of that the managerial class came out of the industrial revolution, and maybe we're in a new economic regime that doesn't necessarily require that amount of structure or org chart?
Yeah, except the flip side of that is sort of Mag 7 dominated oligarchy, right? So like, yes, trust, if what we're saying about trust is correct, then relocalization, smaller enterprises, more accessible services, I see that too in my hometown, right? I'm seeing a lot of real growth in community building, and that's great. I love that. But by the same token, one of the reasons I'm pretty right tail on the distribution for what I think about US equities, despite my concerns about everything going on in the world, is that I'm not going to bet against the house. And the S&P 500 is the house now. That's the house. It's government and it's economics. So
Right.
it's real hard to bet against that without leaving the country entirely.
So here's what I'm struggling with on like the right tail, left tail, like split here on that, specifically that point is if Mag 7 does struggle for a while, if the US does struggle for a while, and we're seeing some maybe early hints of this, does it actually broaden out? Is like all the focus and exposure in the US financial or US stocks in the global financial assets portfolio, if that finally stumbles, do we actually redistribute? Do we see earnings broadening out? Do we see like earnings around the world broaden out as these large US leaders like actually struggle? And is that another net positive? Is that right tail or left
I
tail
think,
in your brain?
yeah, I don't know. That's sometimes, you hate trite phrases or cliches, but they tend to work, especially investing. And that's why when people get older, like you hear Howard Marks or Warren Buffett, they use those trite cliches. So we have to understand those first. And I think as Jared Dillian had one that was essentially like, that's probably most likely a copy of somebody else. It's a copy of somebody else, the way none of us have original ideas. But the idea that like the bull argument sounds so airtight at the top, and like bear market sounds so airtight at the bottom. And so I think that's kind of what you're getting into, Matt, in a way of like right now you could argue that the Mag 7 dominate and everything, especially in the AI world. And even these incumbents that think they have AI, it's like, incumbent AI firms is like, well, the Mag 7 can just implement an AI, right? Because there's nothing really that unique or novel about it, right? And then they dominate those lower players. And then so you could argue that Mag 7 is going to continue dominating. And then people have been going on and on about like how Europe is lagging behind, et cetera. So it almost looks like there's no chance of that dispersion that you're talking about, Matt, except for we've seen the markets the last few months that we've seen the rise of, ex-US stock markets taking back off as the US market's going down. Is that going to sustain in the future? None of us necessarily know, but it could be an interesting dispersion, moving forward. Does that make sense? The way I'm kind of laying it out there.
Yeah, I think the question is here's how I'd reframe the question: is what we're seeing
Yeah.
an actual bear market where we're going to see long-term
Mm.
shifts in earnings profiles and company valuations and the
Yeah.
decline in the US prominence in the global economy, or is what we're seeing a reset of what had become an over-dominant asset allocation to the US? And that reset of the asset allocation implies some short-term pain and then going back to effectively grinding higher as America continues its merry way. I tend to believe the latter, even though I tend to be pretty negative about stuff. I kind of think it's the latter. I think that we're resetting. Like, I think there's some room for the market to come down. I think we're going to see international allocations go up inside the US and US allocations go down outside the US. We're already seeing some of that. I think we're a ways away from, for instance, major European sovereigns selling all of their US equity, which would be the kind of shift that we would then say, well, that's a pretty significant left tail event for the US market. I don't think that happens. I think a lot of this is poking at each other. We'll reset a little bit lower and then we'll grind our merry way along. And at the end of the day, what that's going to mean is a whole bunch of US investors are actually better diversified, which is probably good.
But even like you said, though, don't bet against the house earlier. The way I always think about it, and sovereign versus like even U.S. individuals, like as we all know, like target date funds are, structurally, like you're saying, bet against the house. Structurally, everybody's money is flowing in to these target date funds. But maybe Dave, maybe you research it, or but Matt actually dealing with your clients, you know better, is like even what percentage now of target date funds are actually even going into international. So until maybe that shifts, and does that shift as S&P goes down, international comes up? Does MSCI ACWI's percentage change? I haven't spent enough time to really think about how that shifts from the house having the structural and legal components of target date funds, just having those massive flows into those indexes.
Well, they never change, right? I mean, that's the main thing, is that the only way that the real shift in the balance inside TDFs change is when the population changes, right? So younger workers coming in, older workers dying out and going to cash, giving their money to the younger generation, which then re-risks that into equities, right? That cycle creates a little bit of froth, because it has to be sold out of fixed income when people die and then bought back into equity when people are younger. So if anything, the generational wealth transfer is very much a betting with the house kind of move, right? So I think that what goes on inside target date funds isn't going to matter because they're never going to change. That's part of why I'm convinced that pseudo convinced
The
that
house.
what we're seeing is the reset, right? We're seeing the reset from large institutional players and some retail froth around the international chaos. And then we're just going to grind higher, and we've got complete corporate capture of the government. And that's going to be very pro stock.
And I think about this too from the international perspective. It's like if I'm living overseas, I'm internationally diversified by owning the US. And so maybe at the margin, European households go like, oh, maybe I do want to own some, European banks, defense stocks.
Yeah,
and else.
like the UK is I believe this is true, was the most home biased country in the world. Meaning, or sorry, the anti-home bias country in the world, meaning they own almost no UK equities. The average UK investor owns way more US and Europe than they own UK companies. I think you could see some of that shift.
You move that needle, and you probably don't have to move that needle that much to get sort of like that twin engines of earnings or some fundamental growth and actual, valuation multiple expansion. Like I could see a little bit of flows tilting that just a little bit without sucking all the air out of the US.
None of that feels like tails. That actually all sort of feels like the middle of the distribution right now.
Gaussian.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, and I know we're trying to steel man some of these tails here.
I've ever heard that used as an insult.
Gaussian. I like it. We're more the Cauchy guys against the Gaussians here. So the nerd alert. I do think maybe that is one of the externalities of Trump's policies and everything, like you're saying, is then it forces European, South Americans, Asians to maybe look at where they're investing and moving then out of S&P 500. I think it was Cuppy on a podcast the other day. It was anecdotal, but he was saying he was talking to Brazilian clients or Brazilian friends, and he's asking where they're invested, and they're like, well, all in the S&P 500, because and they're like, have you looked at your markets lately? And they're like, having looked at how much they've had to run up, especially in the last, since the beginning of the year. So maybe, everything is almost like lagging cargo ships. So maybe, this is part of everybody, international politics, and kind of mercantilism being on the table again, is that people start, shifting even their asset allocation, or they could shift it and, maybe they still want to bet on the US versus their country as clean, sturdy, sure. I'm not so certain. Part of one of the things that was related though, that Dave, that you brought up, that when we're thinking about the degrading or decaying of institutions, that made me think about, and especially in this country, like SMBs just in, small businesses, outweigh obviously Mag 7, just in numbers, but not necessarily in percentages. Right. But it does make me think that, the internet is interesting in the sense that I heard somebody say once that boomers got cheap houses and, Gen Z is getting cheap businesses. And so that's an interesting trade-off, right? But by having cheap businesses where you just spin one up on Shopify and everything, instead of spending all this money on bricks and mortar, it means you're competing against the rest of the people that get cheap businesses. So I think about maybe a million flowers blooming from the small business sector. And that's what we're talking about with AI, is you can basically maybe run that enterprise with fewer people using AI. And like you said, they like the cut of your jib, no matter what kind of corporation you're in. But in the way I think about that too is on the tariff side, I'm trying to think of how this relates to tariffs, is one of the ideas allegedly with the tariffs, right, is to bring back American manufacturing. But as we all know, American manufacturing at this rate of minimum wage and everything is most likely going to be roboticized. So I was talking to a firm the other day here. I was with my friends down in the Bay Area that they run Copper Home. So shout out to Copper, but they build electric ranges with electric induction ranges with batteries inside of them. So it has a trickle charger battery. So it's almost taking that power off the grid and kind of storing it at the locality. And I thought it was really interesting. So we were talking about all these tariffs and everything. And it's maybe they become more roboticized, but then at the same time, maybe that's a million flowers bloom even on the manufacturing side. So maybe it's less people actually inside that business working on manufacturing, but we have much more businesses. So it's like it's multiplying the two together versus like thinking about how it's going to bring back line workers per se.
Yeah, I think
That's a hopeful right tail. I'm trying to think like how does onshoring, reshoring, nearshoring, like how does bringing back American manufacturing? I'm trying to really hard to steel man it where it doesn't just become roboticized. Like how does it actually bring back jobs?
Yeah, and I think I don't have an answer for you because I agree with you. I don't think it brings back jobs. I think, look, reallocating capital inside the United States, like whether you're buying a factory or you're building a plant or you're like whatever it is, I'm all for it, right? So like whatever it takes for America to be building things is great. But to your point, none of these things that we're talking about are going to add millions of manufacturing jobs at $29.50 an hour. That's not what they do, right? They're going to be a
Right.
small number of very high paid jobs that are highly technical and a lot of management and a lot of maintenance. Like that tends to be what we've seen in like even look at the success stories like the chip fabs that we now have online in the US that didn't exist years ago. Like that's great, but you look at the actual number of new jobs created from those things and they exist, but we're not talking like giant numbers.
All right, let's get. Oh, well, Buck, you got anything else on the right tail on your mind, or are we going? Let's go.
Not
Deep.
on not on AI, but we can talk about like the different forms of the right tails. But yeah, please take us in whatever direction you want to.
Give me one more right tail. Give me one more shred of optimism before we.
I've been trying real hard to think about this between meetings. Yeah, I'm like, I was like, let's say, I think that the group chat was setting up for failure, but I also thought it was a challenge, right? Like, I was like, challenge accepted. I would try to steel man anything that I disagree with, always. So I was trying to think, with, let's call it tariff policies, whatever, right? So one, obviously, if we could get a set it and forget it, like kind of tariff policy where we're not flip-flopping every day with the tariff policy of putting them on or changing them, like, right? If we had a 5-10 year plan on tariff policies, that way people could adjust to them. One, that would change dramatically, right? Instead of just going back and forth where people don't know what to do. The second is, as we know, tariff policies are essentially just a tax, right? And either that gets passed on to the consumer in a one-time inflationary impulse, or the businesses eat it, right? And so maybe that, that's what's hard about bringing it back to American manufacturing is that whether they eat it or not. But maybe, part of eating it brings back, maybe we're seeing a pushback of labor versus capital, right? And Dave was saying, maybe we don't, see those high paying jobs or we see fewer of them, but maybe we've had an unusual 50 year period of American businesses having high margins. Maybe those contract back in. And so maybe it does bring back, especially kind of mission critical American manufacturing. And maybe we bring it all back because originally the bet really was like to, kind of go Peter Zeihan on it, right? The idea of, offshore manufacturing and everything was based on the backs of like the US Navy being able to patrol, all the oceans and everything. And that we were living in a Pax Americana with no kind of world wars or no sort of, retaliatory tariff policies. And so that was your margin. So maybe with those things on the board now it's much easier to do interstate commerce in America. And you're not really worried about your transportation costs or being lost at sea for 3 months or longer. So again, trying to see some of the green shoots that could potentially, happen from that movement in the future if we have a clear policy about how people can move forward in that space.
I'll give you the right tail on the tariff policy, which is, I think we're going to implement it so poorly that we're going to have the real conversation. No, I mean this genuinely.
Yeah.
I think we're going to have a real conversation about how we fund the American experiment that gets out of this trap that we're in of like all taxes always bad, all government spending always bad, which seems to be like the battle we end up in. We are the only country in the OECD without a VAT. And I'm not a big fan of value-added tax in general because I'm a leftist and I think they're regressive, which they are. But if what we're going to do is effectively back ourselves into a really terribly implemented VAT system, which is kind of seems like what we're doing, where it's very capricious and all over the place, why don't we just let this fail? Let's have the conversation about, great, we want to get to a country where we're going to have really regressive taxation based on consumption. We'll end up like the rest of the OECD and we'll just slap a 12% VAT on everything, right? And you make the adjustments around to make it palatable, you make adjustments around food and clothing and the things that every other country does around VAT so that it doesn't actually impoverish the entire country. And then you actually start having real conversations with your importers and exporters about even competition, because everybody's facing the VAT. Like, I don't understand why that's an anathema conversation. I think Paul Ryan brought that up 7 years ago or something like that, and was taken out back and beaten for it. Like, I'm not a fan of it. I'd rather not have it. I'd rather have progressive tax policy. But if what we're going to do is rip all this crap down and go mercantile again, well, okay, let's just put a VAT. Why is that? Why was that conversation? So maybe we get that.
That was
and that would probably be the positive.
That was part of my right to positivity, is like you're like you're saying, you're shifting the taxation policy to more of a consumption tax that way through the tariffs. But and we were having this conversation yesterday when I was down in the East Bay, but like, explain that to me, why you think a VAT policy is regressive.
Oh, you want me to explain that?
Yeah.
Because people who have over $1 million don't spend as a percentage of their wealth compared to people who are on the lower end of things. If I'm making $50,000 a year, much more of my money is going to be spent on a 15% VAT than if I'm a millionaire and I've got $25 million sitting in the bank. And yeah, I'm going to consume more goods than the person making $50,000 a year. But as a percentage of my wealth and income, the amount that I'm going to spend is going to be substantially less than the person who's not. And like, that's not magic math. You can look at almost every country that's got a value-added tax, and you can see that the people who make $10 million a year do not pay $1.5 million in VAT tax, right? They just don't.
Yeah. But isn't that the same as their tax policy is currently, like in percentage terms, like you're saying, from actual income?
Oh, well, look, now the difference is, theoretically, we have a progressive tax system where if you make $10 million a year, you are paying something like 30% plus of that income out. Now, we have so many loopholes in the system, and we have a nice entire industry around making that not true. But the story we tell ourselves is that if you're making millions of dollars, you're paying 30-40% taxes, but depending on where you live. Yeah, I don't actually believe that's true. I don't think we actually implement a progressive tax policy in this country. So why not let us have the real conversation? And a failed,
like you're saying,
tariffs might get us there.
And like you're saying, if you had your way or whatever in that scenario, like you can have offsetting, like they're allegedly saying anybody that makes under 150K is not going to have income tax. So that helps offset part of that. But then, like, would you say then you pick and choose what has that VAT tax? And so it's going to be more like private jets, or,
I mean, that's what other countries do.
Right. And try to set it up that way. And so like you're saying, then you're offsetting it that way.
Yeah. So look, I'm not a giant tax policy expert. My point is simply, it's clearly stupid and mathematically impossible to replace income tax with tariffs. We simply do not consume enough goods to make that a possible thing. So if what we're talking about is restructuring how the US government collects money from its citizenry, let's have that conversation. And that means that taxes are in fact on the table, right? Like I'd be in favor of ripping the whole thing up and starting all over, because clearly it's too complicated now. The problem is when you say that out loud, people come up with 400 reasons why that kills thousands of children. It's probably true.
But this is part of the whole, and this is, I think, in the pure chaos of how much news we're trying to consume or trying to avoid every single day right now.
Yeah.
It's like, it all feels like surely this is leading somewhere, but you can't ever figure out which somewhere it's actually leading to. Because that actually, what you just said actually makes a lot of sense to me. If it was tariffs are a stepping stone towards just a VAT program, and this is how we're going to do a value-added tax to adjust to replace the current tax system. And like, here's our stepping stone towards that future.
I'd take any plan at this point. I'd literally take any plan. There's no plan. Nobody has written down a plan that I can look at and say, I disagree or I agree. There's no plan. I would like a plan.
Listen, Gaussian, you were here for the AI tale. You know that everything
Gaussian.
Here. It's fine. Gaussian.
Gaussian.
All right.
I say for all the hate we're getting to the comments, I will point out, because I know we'll get some support from this one particular comment, and in the is that we're arguing about taxes and what taxes do. We make it take a bigger picture of like do tax collection actually matter in the monetary operation sense. So I just want to throw that out there so I can get at least one positive comment in the comment section. And I'll get 10 hate ones though for that one as well. But another one I'll throw out there though, on the positive right tail, let's just say hypothetically that this Trump card brings in the amount of money that like Letnick thinks it can bring in. Like that is kind of interesting to me in a weird way.
Sorry, do you mean the gold immigration card?
Yeah, just in a weird way, it's kind of interesting, right? Like I think it's like totally ancillary, exogenous, does not matter. But like if they were saying, I think I saw them say like they believe there's 37 million people worldwide that could afford or want that gold card. But it's like if they sold 200,000 of them, what is it, $1 trillion coming in? Like, I mean, it's in a entertaining way. I find it very entertaining.
I just can't wait for the rules about like, well, if you paid the money to be in the country and then you wrote an op-ed we disagree with, which fake immigration law gets precedent? The fake immigration law where you bought your way in, or the fake immigration law where we kick you out because you wrote something we didn't like? Like, how are they going to adjudicate that? You need a whole new court.
Like, to your point though, that I'm trying my best to create a simplistic, optimistic scenario. I thought this was a yes and
what
stop.
was I doing? I'm sorry. I forgot the rules.
I thought this was yes and. Yeah, I thought this one was it was like April Fool's Day, like upside down, whatever they or we're pretending to be, Panglossian optimists around here.
Well, enough with the optimism. Let's end the world a couple of ways before we surprise each other with topics. Anybody got a favorite way they? I'll kick this one off. One of my favorite things that I generally don't know about, and it feels like a left tail thing, is does anybody want to hang out with the U.S. anymore? If we keep going down this path, do we pick enough fights where we're like, we were the coolest bully in school until we bullied all the kids, and then there's nobody left?
Yeah.
Does this get repaired?
No. Like I think I don't mean that to be flippant.
This is left tail. Like
I don't mean to be flippant about it. I don't actually think that the Pax Americana can be restored because you only get to burn some cards once. Frankly, I think this started when we cut Russia out of SWIFT, which was something I think we should have done, and was glad that we did.
Peter Zion would tell you it started before that. It started when we frack natural gas.
Yeah, sure, right. I mean,
China
you could
took
say
the
that
NBA
it was the
top
first
or
Iraq War. Like, I mean, look,
sure.
you can put your marker in anything. The most recent place where I was like, oh, we don't get to go back, was kicking Russia out of SWIFT, and that's when we said, oh, America is pulling back from being the place where the neutral arbitration happens in the financial markets, because now we've weaponized the payment system. Okay, once you weaponize the payment system, you've told the world we can weaponize the payment system. Nobody ever looks at it the same way. It doesn't mean the world ends tomorrow, but it means that, yes, your opinion is different. Imagine if the Signal chats that we just saw were very different in the sense that they said the whole part out loud, which was the U.S. Navy should not be defending global sea lanes, which is, they didn't say those actual words, but that's kind of what they were saying when they were saying, this is Europe's problem. Why are we worrying about this? Like, when the message finally gets out there that the U.S. is not going to protect global shipping anymore, that's a big left tail. That's a big left tail.
So I'm happy to take the other side of this one. Sorry, man, if I cut you off, but like, I could view the opposite of when we kicked the Russians out of SWIFT, that actually is going to lead to maybe another 50, 100 years of American hegemony and Pax Americana. Like, the problem is with any sort of Pax or hegemony, right? It's eventually going to decline. We just don't know when or how long it'll last. And so to me, it's like the sense that maybe, and it's related to Matt's question about the bully, is like, I think maybe potentially, one could argue that we were being kind of too nice about the Pax Americana for decades. And then every once in a while, you got to assert your authority to remind everybody what's up, right?
But what's the positive there for us?
It's in the sense that, like, if you have to have like that threat of violence, like I would analogize it to like, like if you're raising your kids and everything, most of the time people want to be their friends, but every once in a while you got to put the hammer down so everybody knows who's in charge and where the responsibilities lies in the org chart, that kind of thing. And so that's maybe part of it, is just saying, hey, there are consequences for your actions. So maybe that deters future actions. I'm not necessarily saying that's always the case, and we can go down a consequential chain of what are the pros and cons of that. But I could see how one could make the argument that got everybody back in line for a while, that there are consequences that are hopefully not World War III, that can just be like a swift issue. And then we go back to like everybody getting back in line.
What's
I've
your
thought of-
left tail then?
Well, adding on to that, though, this is my yes and for that scenario, because I've thought about this too. It's like when you pull Russia out of, it's like you guys already weren't a great partner to us, and you're maybe even a worse partner to the Europeans. And that's sort of chain links this thing of like everybody going, this is not a good partner for us in business or politics or whatever else. And if that could be used as originally intended, I think, in some of the act of like binding us closer to Europe for economic development and for some of the other stuff that we want to do, should kickstart some of those animal spirits as partners.
Do you think we're actually? I mean,
No, this
we're
is
not
my
getting
left tail
closer to any
scenario.
of
I
that.
feel like we could have been getting closer.
Yeah,
and we're getting
fair.
further
So
away.
but like, so what? But I want to hear Jason's left tail on this, right? So you're saying like, actually, maybe this has got some positives to it, and that's sort of what keeps it from being a left tail event. What are you concerned about? I mean, this is literally your business, like, is focusing on left tail events.
Yeah.
What are
Ruining
you
the
worried
world.
about,
How
Jason
is-
Fuck of Mutiny Fund?
Well, I think there's everything we can illuminate, to go back to our great phrase from a Gaussian perspective, right? Those are the known knowns, right? And as a Black Swan guy, as you guys are alluding to me, as is like the whole point of those are unknowns, right? And so I don't really pontificate about those. I just prepare, don't predict. And so like, it doesn't behoove me necessarily to come up with it. I know it's not great for our level of conversation
You
here.
just dodged me this conversation.
Yeah. Well, I was really focused on right tails today. I was trying to be, opposite day. I'm pure optimism today. But I mean, there's a million. This is the thing about, like, as Taleb would say, gray swans versus black swans. And so that's what you're really talking about, Dave. Like, what are the gray swans? And I think there's dozens of gray swans we could illuminate. But it's more the black swans that hurt us the most are the ones that you don't see coming.
Well, that's inarguable.
Yeah. I'm just being evasive.
Just being evasive.
Matt, what's your left tail?
So my left tail is this bully point, is that we've just keep structurally breaking down this stuff, and we keep telling people, no, you got to go solve this problem for yourself, and then we don't actually figure out how to solve problems together. And that's some, Sun Tzu Art of War stuff. I don't know what that first line of the book is, but it's basically like, war is essential, and the war translation is struggle, and struggle is essential. And struggle means there's combative struggle, but there's also just group struggle. And I worry that there's not a lot of group struggle going on. There's maybe some going on on continental Europe right now. There's some going on in between states, but we need that smaller, cohesive struggling together to actually get good stuff to happen. If we keep seeing bigger powers all the way down struggling against each other, then we're at the extreme left tail. The social contract is gone, and it all sucks. And I don't know how far we can go out on that line before we don't get it back.
And as you guys know, though, like, you guys are students of history, like, going into World War I, they said like a world war was impossible, that we were so economically interconnected, right? So it's really hard to see where these things come from, right? That's the thing. It's like that Tinder, inflection point of a world war can come out of the place you never expect. Like, everybody thinks it's gonna be like we go to battle over Taiwan, but it could be something totally different than that nobody is necessarily expecting.
Yeah, I'm like, my geopolitical black swan events are not. I mean, it's easy to talk about the South China Sea and the Taiwan Straits. Like, those have been
Right.
people have been arguing about forever and ever. I actually think it's probably something way less interesting than that. It's some minimal exchange between Chinese and Australians in the Indian Ocean somewhere, right? Like, it's going to be, it's like, Tonkin. It's like, there's always some little thing that it's like, why would that be the thing that ignites a powder keg? That's kind of what I don't think it's actually going to be Russia in Ukraine. And I don't think it's going to be, US aircraft carriers in the Taiwan Straits. I think it's going to be, Madagascar and Zimbabwe. Something. I mean, it's going to be something completely off the radar, like you're saying, that just acts as that spark. That's what I worry.
Yeah, like, I think I'm with you. I think it's an infrastructure play in Africa that goes awry, and that's like the Belt and Road Initiative, and that leads to that's where the powder keg kicks off, or something like that.
Or it's going to be something stupid, right? We're gonna make a dumb mistake because we're dismantling all of our command and control infrastructures, and we do something stupid as Americans that triggers something we didn't really want to trigger.
All the Social Security payments accidentally go to China. Something. It's really
Well, I said it, can't take it back. So that related to that though, and I think this is both left and right tail. I don't depend on how you look at it. What I think is interesting. I saw, by the way, anecdotally the other day, I'm a big fan of Ryan Peterson from Flexport. And so I tend to listen to what he says, but maybe I should do my more research, instead of just listening to what Ryan says. But like he was pointing something interesting out about these tariffs on Canada and Mexico. If you think about NAFTA, what's NAFTA now? USMCA. How can you put those tariffs on if we have NAFTA? And he said there's a loophole in those tariffs that if it's for national security, then you could put those tariffs on. So that's why using that's why they're hammering, he's saying the fentanyl and everything like that is for national security issues, right? And that's why they won't come off of that kind of narrative, but what's really at play there. And I just keep thinking about it. I think that maybe somebody in the administration is smart and is really, obviously, to me, clearly thinking about like the Northwest Passage. And this is why we keep talking about this annexation of Canada or Greenland, is because they're truly worried about the Arctic shipping lanes and going to war with Russia over the Arctic shipping lanes. So all of this that could be potential right tail on if we control Arctic shipping lanes on the Northwest Passage and we're really being able to lean into Canada and Greenland, Denmark on that, or that's the powder keg kind of kicking off point. And that's also based on the assumption that, the polar ice caps keep melting and that really opens up those passageways.
I know that story. I've read that story. That story is really well documented in some great books, like The Decisive Decade by Jonathan Ward. Like this is well-trod geopolitical strategy territory. And every time I hear somebody try to make this argument, it sounds like a freaking board game strategy. It's not the real world.
It's a risk.
Right?
It is a risk.
It's just not the real world. And I don't mean that in a denial sense. I mean it in a do you have any idea how hard it has been for us to maintain the tiny little airstrip in Greenland we already have? And now you're going to tell me we're going to build, some global shipping base there? It's like, sure, it's possible. It would require more energy and time than we're putting into the space station. I mean, yes, we could do incredibly large things as a country if we actually had national will to do them. I see a lot of evidence we got national will to do these things. I think we just have a lot of bluster.
Related to that though, like that's what I'm saying. Like I don't disagree with you that like the world is much more nuanced than we realize, or that there's much more detail than we could ever imagine, and it's much trickier than we could ever imagine. I'm just saying, I mean, I should probably watch the news, but I don't watch the news. It just seems to me, and maybe I'm wrong, and you guys could correct me, is that when people are losing their minds over Canada as the 51st state, or why we want to buy Greenland, and nobody's talking about that Northwest Passage shipping route. Right?
Oh no, they are. They try to bring it up on Fox News every time they mention this stuff, right? Okay. Like it's not. This is not
a
like
better
a
man than
narrative.
both of us for watching the news to find that detail.
It's not a hidden narrative. It is the foundational talking point of the right think tank.
Right.
But I also think this is what's important about having these tails conversations, because they force us to just like, I don't know, put this stuff on the table. And it's interesting that all these so far have been, here's the right tail distribution version of it, here's the left. Like all these things could swing in both directions. There's a lot of
and the central tendency is probably nothing, right? The central tendency is we don't take over Greenland, we don't take over Canada, we do some damage to ourselves by trying to, and the world moves on. I certainly think in the time frame I've been trying to think about this, a couple years, no, none of that's going to happen.
And to come back to Dave's, Gaussian perspective, as Trump injects volatility only just widens the distribution.
Yeah,
so like your first and second standard deviation become wider. So like your parameters for Gauss like just expand.
So we're just talking. Now it's just a kurtosis argument. That's all we're.
Yeah, exactly. Now we've lost everybody. Definitely.
We've lost. No, we didn't get the heteroskedasticity or whatever the hell that is yet. Once we're there, they're gone.
Oh, good Lord.
All right. I'm declaring an end to the freaky tales. What did we bring to the table?
All right, I got the first one. It's a really simple question. I just genuinely want your opinions. Do you think that Canada's animosity towards the United States has legs? I think I don't actually know. I know a lot of Canadians who are really excited about hating America right now, using the little app, scanning stuff to figure out whether it was made here, canceling Netflix, like all this crazy stuff that my friends in Canada are doing. I have no idea whether any of this has legs or whether this is just like in 3 weeks we're just going to be talking about Beyonce.
So first off, I've watched Canadian Bacon, so I feel informed.
You're an
One of the
authority.
greatest movies of all time.
One of the greatest movies of all time. I've watched Canadian Bacon. I will not translate this segment into French on the side of my bus. But I'm also thinking of the like I don't know that this has legs. This kind of feels like when the kids in the college are protesting something and they're angry about it, but it's really unfocused.
And then March Madness happens and everybody forgets. Yeah.
Kind of. Yeah. It feels like there was this time in college where they were going to like protest something and I had to go to work. And so like I'm leaving to work and they're telling me how they're gonna like block these roads. I'm like, when you block that road in protest to like worker wages and all the people who are trying to get to work can't get there.
Yeah.
And my pay is gonna get docked because you're standing.
I'm not on
blocking
your
the-
side. Yeah.
Yeah, like what? Whose side are you actually on in this, and what is this accomplishing? And I'm not saying that the Canadians aren't accomplishing something in the act of protest, but it does feel like where's the targets? Like where's the organization that's
So you think no. You think that Canada's back to flying down to Florida. I mean, there are hard numbers, right? The 70% decline in bookings to the United States on airplane. So that's real. That's going to have some impact.
Sure, that's a great springtime strategy.
Was that seasonality though? Like, yeah,
No,
is
no.
that for
Like
the
this
summer,
time last
or-
year, this time last year, there were 1 million more booked flights to travel to the United States than there are right now. For
But that's
travel
easy to
next
do
month.
in March.
Just
but
April.
let's get
just
back to
April.
like, when we get to November.
That's what I wanna
November,
know.
December.
I want
we'll
to
see
adjust this.
January.
This
No,
is- yeah.
sure. But that's my point. Is like everybody's like, okay, the Canadians love to rally around something. You know, it's an easy topic for them right now because, you know, pretty clearly they're on the right side of the argument. So it's really easy to root for the Canadians in this one, even though I'm an American. But like, Jason, do you think it has any legs? Do you think if we're sort of in the status quo here in November, people aren't booking their Florida trips for January?
I think obviously nothing has had a better promotion of like Canadian patriotism than the last few months, right? Like
Right.
that's what's interesting. And so like what's the kind of the old theory that like, you know, we can't really rally together globally unless we had to fight aliens, right? Like you need
Right.
a external force to like rally internally, like for
It's-
like
and that we're
you know,
it?
within yeah, like within families, right? Like you'll fight with your family members, but if somebody comes after your family, like you're going to protect them. So like it is interesting. Like it could congeal that Canadian patriotism. I mean, unfortunately, generally, I'm somebody that thinks, you know, the world is full of sound and fury in the end, signifying nothing. But the whole point to this stuff, and this is why I find a lot of this conversation difficult for me, is like I actually hate consequentialist philosophy because the idea that like you can, you know, go down the chain of figuring this out is like I think Poincaré like disproved this with billiard balls alone. That like you'd have to take into the rotational forces of the earth after a certain amount of hits, and you know now we're not even taking into account irrational human beings. Because it could potentially be that thing that really galvanizes Canada, or it could not, right? Like you
Right.
said, you know, given some unseasonably cold weather, could that, you know, change anybody's mind, you know, like, or, you know, we're all.
And remember, they
we're
get to go
all,
to Cuba
you know,
too.
yeah, well, maybe, yeah,
You go.
well, what's sure.
Right. That was
Okay.
it. That was my throwaway question. I cede the floor.
But as Matt said, like I watch Canadian Bacon. One of the things I've always hated too is like, you know, I grew up in Michigan. I played hockey all over Canada growing up, but like that gives me no rights to talk about Canada. Like I always think, you know, even I hate when like politicians are like, well, you know, I flew to the Ukraine. I spent a week there. Let me tell you about, you know, I was on the ground. So let me tell you about the Ukraine. It's like, you know, nothing. Like you took around, they held your hand. They told you, they showed you what you wanted to see. You got the things that you want. Like nobody knows anything. Like I lived in Brazil for 2 years. I couldn't tell you anything about Brazilians. I could tell you about my view through my lens, my subjective lens of Brazil. So I think it's hard to talk about Canada or Canadians in general, because it would also be like, the analogy would be like, tell me something that applies to all Americans across the board, right? Like that would galvanize us. And I think that's incredibly difficult to do. And
Well, 9/11.
and so, yeah, it could.
That's the last time I can think of it.
And that was how long, what was your estimate of how long that lasted?
4 years. Felt like
4 years?
yeah. I mean, because 9/11 and the subsequent military action, and like, I think that largely speaking, the U.S. was more united for maybe it was 2 to 3 years after 9/11 than they had been in my lifetime about anything else.
Was that
It was
because we
a
had
really
a
hockey
lack of chemtrails?
Well, they were just getting those up and running, really. I think back then that was the
Proto
for firing up
chemtrails.
the chemtrails. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's why. But you guys, by the way, did you guys see? Speaking of U.S. Canada animosity, did you see like the first 7 seconds of the hockey game? Like, what was it, a few months back, where it's like 3 fights in the first 7 seconds? That was great.
Also, a call
dear.
back to Canadian bacon.
The Canadian bacon.
What is it? The national anthem when he says the beer sucks. I really feel like I need to go.
Yeah, exactly.
The whole
I know
thing
there's so many
sucks.
quotes that I can't remember. We need to, now you're gonna make me rewatch that this
This is-
weekend.
all
That's
right.
perfect.
All right. So we didn't solve Canada. Does somebody have another question?
I got one. This is mine.
Matt, you go.
I'm trying to figure out in talking to people about this stuff, and I'm looking for it. I have it written down here. So John Candido, do you guys know John at all? Bernice's Fund. Really interesting guy. Writes a lot about power laws. Just like the guy can speak in
From your podcast. Shout out to Cultish Creative. I know from your podcast.
John has that weird ability where he like speaks in prose, like he stops and he pauses. Unlike us, he doesn't laugh as hard or as loud, but then he just like, it's like, you know, you ask him a question, and he's like, I'd like my kids to know, what does it take to be a good ancestor? And I'm looking for these, like, maybe not that extreme, but in that sense of things you can say to people to just help naturally broaden their perspective in sort of a pro-social way. And I'm not trying to change any politicians' minds. This is like in the smallest of community senses, but just things that help people go, how can I think about this across my lifetime, if not beyond it? And John's point about what does it take to be a good ancestor? I was like, man, that is an ass kick of like what are you doing today to focus yourself on not sucking? You guys got anything like that I can add to my roster?
I've got a big one, and you may have heard it already. It comes from a Cedric Chin article a couple of weeks ago, which is outcome orientation, which is whenever you're doing anything, just ask yourself why. Like, what is it you are hoping to achieve? What is the outcome objective of the thing you're doing? Whether that's watching smooth brain television, like the answer can be, I would like to turn my brain off for an hour and a half and have it polished by the people at Netflix. That is an acceptable answer, but asking the question and forcing yourself to give the answer, I've found that to be really helpful. I'm not the kind of person who sort of adopts a lot of like new ways of doing things. And this week I'm going to try journaling, and next week it's going to be bullets and whatever. I don't do all that kind of stuff. I tend to live a fairly straightforward life with very few hacks. This one's been a real hack. Like, I'll be sitting here like scrolling news is a big one, or I did manage to delete most of the crap off my phone, but even in WhatsApp groups, I'll be checking up on stuff and I'll be like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? What is it I'm hoping to achieve? Is it that I'm genuinely trying to be informed about the news of the day? That's a great reason to do it. Is it because I'm stuck in the outrage loop about what I read an hour ago? That's a terrible reason to do it. So that's been a great one for me. Just like, why am I doing what I'm doing right now?
What about you, Jason? You got anything for me?
I'm just thinking because maybe the first half of the show I was trying to be so optimistic that now I'm going to go hard in the pain and my pessimism. But then I love the actually
From Steel Man to Tin Man in 3 easy steps.
But the picture Dave painted actually I also got stuck on like, man, I guess I kind of prefer the rock tumbler of Netflix. I'm just polishing the rocks in my brain. So I got lost in the sauce on that one for a minute. But I actually the other side, the way you brought up though, Matt, that I couldn't help myself think about, that I try to bring up. I ask people all the time is like, can either of you name your grandparents' middle names?
Amazing. No.
Yes.
Not without cheating. Not without cheating.
All of them. Mm-hmm.
Dave can?
Yep.
Dave, you're the second person I've asked hundreds of people that. Only you're the second person ever. And so that's when I think about like these idea of legacies and everything is like nobody remembers, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, when I think about like how to be a good ancestor, legacy. The other one, if I'm pessimistic, I understand historically we looked at our ancestors as elders, but I hate to say it, but American prosperity over the last 40 years had made me not necessarily listen to my elders as much, because there seems to be quite a bit of juvenile solipsism to our current ancestors. But maybe I'm cherry picking there, and maybe that tells you about my own familial relations if I'm trying to be a little bit more circumspect about that. And so, yeah, I don't think about legacy or anything like that. It's not something, and I think honestly, a lot of times I think it leads to a lot of self-delusion, right? Like if we're saying I'm thinking about, what is the outcome, or I'm thinking about legacy or being a good ancestor, I worry about those positive stories we tell ourselves, as I put in our group chat. The first rule of life is you have to realize you're a piece of shit and you occasionally do something kind to your neighbors. And so maybe that's where my pessimism comes out. Go ahead.
Do you think, I don't think about like legacy at all. Like I have so little convinced. I'm so unconvinced that I even exist, that the idea that I'm trying to preserve something for other people down the road who I may or may not know, like there's little tiny bits of it. Like there's pieces that I know are important to my kids. Like they would like to have some connection to their grandparents they've never known. Like there's some of that, but I spend literally zero energy thinking about like my legacy. Like what will people say about me when I'm dead? Hopefully they move on with their lives. I'm fine with that.
I think it's the orientation towards doing things that are pro-social. And I think you got at it with the, like, asking yourself why. And kind of, I just had this very stoic oriented conversation with these two guys. And it was basically like, I'm going to butcher it, but it's event plus reaction equals outcome. That formula, if you ever heard of Viktor Frankl in a lot of ways. But it's like, if all you can do is your reactions, all you're doing is asking why. You're just saying like, does this actually matter? Does this not crap on the people around me? Is there something that I made just even this minute slightly better with these people if I just act that way? I'm trying to get people to focus on stuff like that lately, it feels like, without putting on
No, like it's also like, yeah, it's like the long now foundation, that sort of stuff, like thinking long term. But like, it's to get reactions. You heard maybe you heard my guttural one to Viktor Frankl. I'm the one person I'll take the other side of that Viktor Frankl in that book. I think it's the most disgusting book I've ever read. Like the way he shits on people that died in peace is just disgusting to me. Like these people knew they were going to die, so they found some solace and some peace in the last 30 minutes of our lives. And he's like, these pieces of shit didn't have a logos to live up to. And I'm like, this is just this grossest thing I've ever heard.
Well,
and it's only built for people that, think that they have some sort of history or like that they have something to live for.
Can I assume you guys both read Jason Zweig's Danny Kahneman piece about him flying to Europe and ending in his own life?
The assisted suicide piece there.
No, I'd love to read this.
Oh
stuff.
God,
please share it in our group.
But to that point, it is a complicated, recounting of Danny Kahneman deciding at the end of his life to go end his own life on his own terms in Europe, with assisted suicide, and how he dealt with that and why he did it and how his friends dealt with it. And I think like that's the ultimate answer, like to your question there, Jason, about like, what are you doing at the end of your life, right? Where is your agency? And I don't have a strong opinion about that either way, but boy, it's made me really think about it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things.
And the great part. Well, and sorry to interrupt you, Matt. Like the other thing interesting about, like I was saying about self-delusion, I was like Danny Kahneman. What I always loved about Danny Kahneman is he always said like, I've studied human behavior biases my whole life, and I'm still susceptible to all of them.
That last chapter of Thinking Fast and Slow, where he's like, you might be marginally better at the water cooler in talking about this stuff, but you won't be any better. Like even if you know all this stuff, was one of the greatest like mic drop ends. And I think, back to this, like, I don't think thinking about or obsessing over legacy, that kind of do a lot of client work where people are really trying to shape that and do the right things by people who are going to inherit money from them in future generations. That's a separate conversation.
Yeah, I think if you have agency in the world that is really going to outlast you one way or the other, paying attention, like you don't want to be
then
Prince.
You should pay attention to
you don't want to be Prince. You don't want to just let the world do whatever the fuck happens with your legacy. If you've got that kind of impact, I guess maybe I just have I'm so far removed from the idea that I'm going to be leaving multi-generational wealth and or influence to anybody. And I think frankly, the vast majority of humans on the planet are in that bucket as well. I think the bigger question, which I don't have an answer for, is do you have an obligation sort of genetically? Like, am I somehow endowed with some sort of responsibility because of my genetic heritage as a human being to pass along my stories, my knowledge, my way of looking at the world? I know our friend Ben Hunt very much feels that is like a sort of an obligation that we all have. I just don't. And that's, we can still be friends, but like.
I'm unfortunately your camp, Dave, but like that makes sense. Quite, like Matt, like how do you think of like, I wonder how much of that is just like aging. And like you're saying, Dave, is like, it's usually, who writes memoirs, right? It's usually, older dudes, right? That want to like, they think they have some special knowledge to pass on. And I'm like, could that just be the height of hubris, right? Like we're saying like, did we really learn anything? Do we really have truly anything to pass on? But at the same time, I think Matt, what's also interesting, I think that I always say, I really want to do long form podcast recording with like my parents for like my niece and nephew to have their grandparents like on recording so they could learn about their life. Yet I say that all the time. I still haven't done it. It's like I'm still a piece of shit that hasn't done it, right? But I'd like to think I'm a good person that thought of doing it.
You're a good piece of shit. Don't ever forget that.
Yeah, I mean, I do. I have some books and stuff from like the 1800s that were my great grandfathers and stuff like that, and it's cool that I have those things. Have they made any impact on my life whatsoever? No. I feel like all I've done is steward them on to hand them down to my kids, where it probably won't have much impact on them too. But maybe, in 30 years, my son might grab something off a shelf and be like, that could be the thing that grounds him on the day he needs it. I don't know. You never.
The book of drinking songs
Also-
my dad's mom gave me.
I know that's
It's on the shelf. This is one of my most cherished memories of her. And I had very close relationships with all 4 of my grandparents because they've all been alive most of my life. I'm only got 2 left. But that's just because I was at their 50th birthday parties, because speaking of, passing on genetic information maybe at early ages, like we compress those generations really well in this family. But yeah, I don't know if does that book mean anything to anyone ever beyond me?
But like Matt, we always talk about our ADHD brain getting hijacked in our group chats and everything. You just hijacked mine, but I'll come back to it in a second. It's like, but that's why I think, to me, if I look at, I think there's the optimistic part of nihilism is like, if none of this matters, why not be a gentleman? Right? Why
The
not
world
be
ends
kind to
tomorrow.
people?
Plant
Why
the tree
not?
today. Yeah.
Exactly. Why not? Like, it doesn't, if it's all meaningless, like, why not?
We
And
must
so, but Matt, what
imagine
you said,
Sisyphus happy. We must. Thank you, Cameron.
exactly. We must. But also, Matt, with that book of drinking songs, I was actually watching, I think it was last night or early this morning, it was Glenn Hansard in Ireland in a pub, playing music and everybody singing in the bar. And I was going to text you. I was like, how do we become, what would it be, like American folk songs? Like, how do we get people to just do jams in the bar like they do in an Irish pub? And like, what would be the song?
Yeah.
Did you see Dave's video from his trek
When I was in Scotland,
from Scotland? Yeah.
Yeah.
playing in the pubs, just like, but that's a community.
Amazing.
And back to full circle it back to where we started from in terms of potential right tails. I do see a burgeoning re-community thing happening, at least in New England, at least the places that I travel to and live. People are getting together to do more things like that. So, well, I don't know anybody who's doing the, bring your guitar and come down to the pub here and where I live in Massachusetts. I think we're getting towards more of that, and that's a good thing. And that's a different kind of legacy, right?
Something about that. There's something.
And that's the whole, unfortunately, with like AI, right? Like, the optimistic thing would be going back to like where we started, is like, we eventually get back to like that, that's been talked about for centuries now. Is like, we should only be working 10 to 20 hours a week, right? We shorten the work week because of AI and abundance mindsets and whether energy, et cetera. And that allows us to be much more community centric and family centric. But unfortunately, as with studies that already started to show, with AI, we're working even more and more. So who knows if we can ever psychologically, basically, especially in this country, based on our puritanical heritage, if we can ever, shorten that work week and enjoy our lives more.
All right, Jason, what do you got for us? Give us something from your puritanical heritage here. Come on.
Yeah, this is kind of related to everything we talked about, but it's both left and right tail. And then I hope it's not, he talked about any Fox News that Dave's going to remind me of that I just am totally oblivious to the world. And everybody's like, no shit, Sherlock. I was in DC a few weeks ago. And by the way, you're never going to hear me say I'm an inside person in the government and the military in DC. Let me tell you what they were saying. If you guys ever hear me say that, just shoot me. Like, I can't stand when finance guys do that.
Tell us about your signal chat, Jason. Tell us about
Yeah, exactly. I got a high up person at the Pentagon. I just can't tell you who it is. Like, that annoys the shit out of me. No, I'm just with a friend in DC. But what we were talking about is the real estate prices in DC tanking, right? With the ocean and everything. And so I'm like, DC has I would assume, especially if we have a 4-year turnover, a Lindy effect, which who knows, maybe we're going to have a president for life scenario, which, would be interesting to say the least. But, that was it. 7 out of the 10 wealthiest counties in America are in DC, but that's much more probably Gaussian central distribution than not having tails. I'm going back to our Gaussian.
Thank you.
But I keep thinking about those, like, when would be the time to buy the DC real estate? What would be my catalyst? And what I argued with my friend is I think the catalyst is when, this is my theory, and I think it's obvious, so I hope other people are talking about it, is Trump is pushing so hard, but he's using Elon to do it. And until he truly breaks things and the populism revolts, then he'll offer up Elon as his Gerardian scapegoat. And what I think just ironically that I think would be hilarious to me is all the Elon sycophants now they have to admit that like Trump outsmarted their super genius Elon. But I'm like curious of like how you guys think about it. It's like, is Elon a Gerardian scapegoat? Is that what turns, is that what we're using to push hard? And then when things get broken too far and everybody revolts, then he's the ritual sacrifice?
Yeah. That's what I think.
You need a fall guy. Like you need these things get pre-planned for a reason, or at least get thought out of. Like nothing is sacred, and I don't think anything feels sacred right now. So
also, I mean, hasn't Trump turned on almost literally everybody who's ever worked with him in a high-profile capacity?
Well, that's what I mean. This is not a new playbook here.
Yeah. I mean, the real weird tale would be if 4 years from now we elect still Trump, talking about Elon Musk in the White House as often. Yeah.
But also, even outside of that, like, don't you think like the drawdown, like allegedly the downturn in DC housing prices is like, it's just a 4-year cycle, right? Like why wouldn't you be buying, but how do you buy the dip, cycle. Right?
Yeah, it might even be
right, I'm saying.
That. It could be a 2-year cycle, 18 months.
Yeah, it depends how much you think how much damage actually gets done, right? That's the issue.
It's got to be a spillover effect, right? It's like as an isolated incident, it might present interesting opportunities if nothing else happens. Versus if like something else happens, then it could be more areas could experience their different reasons, not for Doge, but they could experience different things. It's kind of like private credit needs more than subprime auto loans to have a 6% default rate when they're charging 20%, right? Like it's got to spread bigger than this for it to be the inferno of hellfire that we're also desperately waiting for.
Like we want it to be the inferno of hellfire.
The inferno of hellfire. Did you look at any properties? Like, are you seeing some good deals? I haven't gone on Zillow in DC yet, but did you?
I'm a sucker for historic properties. So, and I'm a sucker for Zillow porn, like on the weekends. So I do look. I am definitely that person.
Good? Did you find anything good? The White House?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of interesting stuff too. Yeah. And I was actually looking right by the, they rebuilt around the whole Navy Yard, and there's a lot of great restaurants and stuff around there. But I was also noticing when I was driving through DC to avoid traffic the other day, it took me down by the Navy Yard, and even how they have posted guards around a lot of those properties. And I'm like, you have beautiful townhouses across the street. So if you're also worried about security, it's like you almost have a full-time guard on your neighborhood. Yeah. Why not?
No, I see a lot of upside. We could all relocate to DC.
I'm never
keep
moving.
Going south.
Never moving.
But I don't. And then I don't know if you guys know, like I lived for a while in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and obviously they have a lot of security issues there amongst the wealthy. And what was great in some of those wealthier neighborhoods, the neighborhood would pay to have like these like kiosks on the corners where they have security guards and everything, right? But it's also like it's like the theater or illusion of security, right? Because every time like 4 guys would pull up with semi-automatic guns to the security guard, right? And they just put them on the ground, and then they go around the houses or kidnap the kids. Like it wasn't like, what are they gonna do, right? Like,
yeah,
they didn't even have time to like call the actual police.
Jesus. Yeah. Well, on that note, I mean, I think that's probably it.
It started optimistic. I had to bring the pessimism back. It's that my bipolar nature to get us to a Gaussian median.
Back to Gaussians.
Imagine Sisyphus.
You think Jack's going to use? I'm sorry. So you think Jack's going to use Gaussian's got to be in the title of this one, right? Somehow, right?
I mean, clearly that's driving the clicks for this.
Fucking Gaussian. That's the title, right?
With a big dumpster fire on DC right behind it. It'll be. Yeah. I am cheating. I am looking at my phone to get a one quality Canadian bacon quote to send this out on. And lest you forget, the character name is Boomer. That is our main protagonist there. There's a time to think and a time to act, and this gentleman is no time to think.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
All right, guys, this is great. You're watching Clickbait on XS Return. See you guys soon.
Goodbye.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe and tell a friend. Matt Zeigler is a managing director at Sunpoint Investments. Jason Buck is the chief investment officer at Mutiny Funds. Dave Nadig is an independent financial futurist and hopeful ETF expert. No information in this podcast should be construed as investment advice. Securities discussed in the podcast may be holdings of the hosts or their clients.